Watch The Atheist Experience live Sundays at 4:30 p.m. Central. Visit tiny.cc/YTAXP and call into the show at 512-991-9242 or connect to the show online at tiny.cc/callaxp.
It's time to get sexy on Secular Sexuality.
And welcome to Secular Sexuality, the ACA show that's about to make you feel like you really need a shower. My name is Christy Powell, and tonight I have my faithful sidekick and beta host, Kara Griffin.
Hey, it's funny because that's not a thing, but I'm glad to be here.
We'll get into it, yeah. And tonight's guest is part YouTube activist and part snarky duck. Welcome, Emma Thorne.
Thank you so much for having me.
Mm-hmm.
And tonight we're diving into the red waters of the Manosphere. So grab your alpha dog, which is also not a real thing, and give us a call with your stories and questions at 512-991-9242 or tiny.cc/callsex because the show is coming right now.
All right. Well, Emma, very, very excited to meet you. Let's tell the audience a little bit about who you are by finding out what's got you turned on this week.
Sure. I have been reading a book called Payback's a Witch by, I believe the author is Lana Harper. And it's like I get a mystery book subscription because otherwise all I would read is nonfiction and classic sci-fi. So this is like young adult sort of magical romance, and it's got bisexual main characters, which I'm living for. It's a rare treat. And it's kind of like a mix of, young magical adventure with this kind of steamy romance between these two young witches going on at the same time. It's I recommend it a lot.
Bisexual YA witches, totally here for it. Glad to hear it. What was the title again?
Oh, yeah. Payback's a Witch.
Payback's a Witch. All right.
And it's got a pun, so.
Yeah, so there you go. That's really everything that you needed. You've got the like occultish sci-fi element. You've got, I'm sure, tons of love triangles, and you've got a pun in the title. That is some YA right there.
Yeah.
You had me with the pun. I'm Googling it right now. This is on my list.
Yeah. So, Kara, what I'm imagining, what are you reading right now? What's got you turned on?
Yeah, how'd you know it was going to be a book? I never talk about books on this show. I don't know how you knew that. Yes. So I'm also recommending a book, surprise everyone, that's sort of topically relevant, but it's one of my favorite authors. It's a nonfiction, but the book is called Are We Smart Enough to Know How Smart Animals Are? And it's by Francois, who is a primatologist, but the book is about all sorts of other animals too, and just kind of takes a look at, do we really understand the intelligence of other animals? And have we probably underestimated them? Hint, yes, probably so. And I love it. It's just a great way to kind of get out of our own heads and think about things a little bit differently and do some work taking on other perspectives, because we're all animals, and some of the other animals besides us might be a lot better at doing a lot of things than we are. So
I'm excited to check it out. It took me a long time to deconstruct my faith, in part around that idea of, I guess, human superiority, human specialness. And I'm just so desperate to be able to talk to animals. I don't want to learn anything more about Coco the gorilla. Objectively, Dan ruined that fantasy for me. So I'll be interested to check it out.
Yeah, please do. It's a good one. I loved it. Learned a lot. And yeah, it's gonna you'll like it better. It's more of a, positive look at, hey, these other animals are cool too. Let's respect them as well. So
glad to hear it. Well, let's jump into the interview. And I guess I kind of want to acknowledge it up top that I don't usually make it a habit of like starting an interview off by sharing my own life story. But I want to at least acknowledge for the folks that we're talking to tonight and the folks that we're maybe talking about tonight, that, I myself dated my high school sweetheart for 7 years before we got married as 21-year-old conservative Christian virgins. Spoiler alert, not a great recipe for a successful relationship, as I'm sure a lot of our audience knows. But I mean, then I was like 25 years old when I tried to go out on my first date. And, thankfully, I had been kind of re-indoctrinated with some interesting new to me ideas from folks like Dan Savage and Esther Perel. But honestly, I think it could have been pretty easy for me to have fallen into people like Ben Shapiro and Ross Jeffries. So now, as a therapist, I work with a lot of folks, particularly young men who've left the church, who feel like they're behind when it comes to dating and are kind of desperate for somewhere to turn. So, Emma, I was hoping you could talk to us a little bit about how common and maybe tempting some of the ideas that we're discussing tonight can really feel when you find them out in the wild.
Oh, for sure. I mean, the way you describe people feeling like they're left behind in dating, it's so especially prevalent now. We know after having a couple of years of lockdown for various reasons and struggling
Hmm.
to even go out and meet people, there's huge amounts of people that feel that kind of left behind nature. It's interesting because the where it becomes kind of this advantage taking manosphere side of things is that the age gets brought down and down to the point where you see like 13-year-olds thinking that they should have had dating experience by now and that they're
Yeah.
feeling left behind. It's definitely something that is more prevalent on the internet, but I mean, this has been I guess you'd say kind of the game. Neil Strauss kind of popularized or repopularized the idea of the dating game, and sort of relit that fire of the manosphere. And I think that was like 2005, and since then it's just like skyrocketed with more people staying at home and yeah, finding it harder and harder to get out and meet people and just feeling that gulf of being left behind.
Yeah. Yeah, I hear that. Well, so can you then walk us through a little bit about what you mean when we say manosphere or some of this like red pill culture kind of stuff?
Sure. Well, red pill is a term that's kind of been taken over. I think most people probably know that that's been taken from The Matrix, which is always a fun thing because it's a movie by two trans women that is a trans allegory. It's been taken by this group to mean this very kind of gender binary, sort of patriarchal, kind of sexist vibe.
I'm so
So
glad
the
that you
idea of
brought
red
that
pill
up.
based on that,
Yeah.
it's
Like
one of my favorite things to remind people who use the term red pill.
a great
Um,
self-own. It's just
yeah. But yeah, so per the Matrix, the idea is that red pill is the reality that people don't share, that people don't tell you, and that reality tends to revolve around kind of biological determinism. It is very gender binary. Men need to do X, Y, and Z and be X, Y, and Z because women are only interested in men who are like X, Y, and Z. Women are this and that. It tends to be things that aren't very flattering. Women are liars, and you can't this is the sort of core of it, is that you can't trust women on how to date women because they lie about everything,
I
or they
mean,
don't.
math checks out, right? Like if women lie
Right.
about everything, you wouldn't want to ask them about dating advice.
Well, then you can't trust a woman who says she doesn't lie, right?
Oh, yeah.
and then
Yeah.
at the
And
same
therefore
time, why am
basically,
I still single? You know. Hmm.
well, yeah, so it's essentially there's nobody to trust but experienced men who have beautiful wives, and therefore you should pay them your money to get the real advice and the truth. And it becomes kind of, it explodes into a big conspiracy just out of like a dating game very, very fast.
Yeah. Well, so you mentioned the online component. I mean, how do these cultures like function? Where do they exist? How do they propagate?
Well, what's kind of there's a really dark side to this where you find, so there's a lot of forums, stuff like Reddit, things spread out. And there's a lot of it's kind of the same with extreme groups and conspiracies of any nature. So I see this a lot with kind of fundamentalists. There tend to be like more acceptable, sort of kinder variations that act almost like as an entry level barrier. So you'll have something like incels without hate, which is like it spreads this ideology, but it's on the surface designed. I have had hate personally from them, so I can attest to it not being 100% accurate. But so there are like these entry level sort of nicer kind of things that introduce the conspiracy, and they lead you to the separate forums that would get banned on Reddit, and then on and then on. And they really do target, and this is something that for some reason the alpha male dudes make fun of me for saying this, they really do target especially vulnerable young men who like it. And like I said, it's especially bad because isolation and things like that now. Just it's definitely targeting younger and more vulnerable people in a way that it's kind of split between, this is how you can be happy, this is how you fix your life, you get a relationship and that makes everything work out for you, and there's no hope for you, you'll never get a relationship, it's all over, join our nihilism. It's like the two extreme paths.
Which is always a good sign when you're hearing a new ideology. If it's, very extreme, you have these two options. It's one or the other, and one of them ends in death and nihilism. Yeah. Oh, good. I found the one true way,
Yeah.
finally. This is it at last.
Yeah, it's very dark. It gets real dark real fast.
Yeah, I mean it definitely scares me because I know I kind of was that geeky, queer-ish, not super having a lot of dating success kind of teenager. Was really shy, and now I've got a 14-year-old who has a lot of that same kind of awkward shyness to him. And I wonder how people get sucked into these kinds of things. I mean, outside of, staying off of Reddit, how do you even prevent something like that?
I mean, the best like solution is always preventative measures, right? So
Sure.
if you share the fact that this culture exists and that what they are peddling is more or less pseudoscience, then when people see it they'll be less inclined to sort of fall for it. But it is hard because, like I say, when they're drawing people in so young, it's hard to know what to look out for. I mean, a lot of it's difficult to give advice because so much of it hinges on families not giving their kids a really insular, isolated upbringing, and things like that can be really influential. It just honestly, it's one of those things where it's like, if you just if you are willing to be friends with women, that will give you a huge advantage because you'll understand that they're people. If you grow up very isolated and go to an all-boys school, you only see girls on these rare occasions and they're like these magical other creatures, then it's just going to be a lot easier to hear these stereotypes about women because you don't know them as a people.
Yeah, no, I mean, just having a diversity of friends, I think, is good medicine. But I feel comforted on that. I think we're in good shape.
Yeah. Well, and I love how you pointed out that, this is based largely in things like pseudoscience. And you mentioned earlier, the whole red pill thing is based on a obvious misunderstanding of the source that term came from. But so what are some of these fundamental like philosophies and sources for these ideas that are getting shared around here in the manosphere and these forums and Reddit and everywhere?
Well, it's become very as it's become this big bulbous mass, it's become very split. Like I say, back in the day it was a lot simpler because you had these writers doing pickup books and it was a very straightforward kind of, this author says to use this technique to get women or whatever. Now there's a lot more, because it gives legitimacy, it lends legitimacy to the kind of theories. There's a lot more using statistics and papers. One thing that I see all the time is using statistics from apps like Tinder as an example of how men and mostly women behave in dating.
Hmm.
And that is a great example of just horribly skewed data because it's a dating app. It's a
Right.
dating app with like, I think it's like 70% women to 30% men or something like that. So, and it's not balanced. And it's an app most people use for hooking up rather than relationships as well. So it's a really, really skewed data point, and that is applied constantly to this is what human beings are like and have been like. There's a lot of there's a lot of amazing so much of it is very fundamentalist Christian as well, which is quite bizarre. But very much it's, well, this is the way it has been throughout history, and then it's applying kind of biological determinism of women are the small, frail, they want you to be bigger than them and look after them, and they shouldn't have a job, and it becomes very classic like patriarchy. And I
Hunters
have
and
seen
gatekeepers and that
yeah,
whole
exactly. Who was the hunter gatherers or whatever.
Oh,
And
Lord.
yeah, I see the Bible used as a source like more frequently than I think you would expect.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me actually. I can see how it would be really easy to fall into that if that is someone's religious background. That's going to be just another way for them to easily slide into that, like you said, thinking, "Oh, this all sounds familiar. This sounds right. The rest of it must be good too. Let me go to the next step and the next conclusion that they've come to because you're so comfortable with the premise to begin with." And I mean, let's face it, sounds like the
Mhm.
sort of the basic underlying ethos of both of these ways of thinking are, misogyny and, you know, ultimately violent, uh, particularly to non-male people. So yeah, that tracks in my mind, unfortunately. And so, speaking of which, we do kind of tend to think of this space as being, primarily populated by this angry, young, middle class white man. Is that accurate? How accurate is that?
No, it's not totally accurate. I don't think. I think in many cases we have to think about who finds it easiest to become a popular voice on social media and YouTube and things like that, and that tends to be young white men. Um, a lot of the time, it's interesting bringing up the sort of like middle class white male as a figurehead because there is like a genre, a side, a part of the kind of red pill theory. I feel like this is something that I know too much about, and it will never go from my brain. I can't. I've lost so much useful information to know this. But there's a sort of a phrasing or whatever that is called JBW, just be white, and part of the ideology is that white men are supposed to just be inherently more appealing to women, and so a lot of the forums are populated by non-white men who feel very hard done by genetics, by race, and that's like there's like a weird racism sort of drawn into this. Although the idea is that it's, I guess, women who are racist or whatever it is.
right.
So it's kind of interesting that we tend to mostly see, because all the popular YouTubers that I know that do the alpha male thing are all usually American, like white men, but when you actually go to the forums and things, it's such a different story.
Ooh, which almost kind of speaks to how problematic it is to begin with. That it's
Yeah.
almost like, the leaders of this group are preying on their own sort of victims within the group as well.
It's
Ugh,
almost like using pseudoscience to rank people based on demographics leads to problems.
shocking.
Who could have thought?
No one would have predicted that. So, speaking of ranking people with pseudoscience, how are women impacted by this movement? And are there women who are involved in it or sort of come to take part in it?
Yes, there are. It's very, I mean, the ways it impacts women primarily is sort of the obvious, uh, the red pill sort of philosophy comes with a lot of misogyny. And so there's a lot of sometimes when I was talking earlier about how dark it gets, a lot of the time real life violence can be linked to members of incel forums and things like that. So it can have real world impacts in a very devastating way. It also so there's a sort of branch of there's a branch of incels known as femcels, which is essentially the same ideology but for women, but females, because they've got to be called females in this group.
Of
It's
course.
very hard to tell how much is because I've seen a lot of it debunked as men essentially pretending to be women, but there is definitely a core there of women who essentially feel the same way. They feel hard done by, left behind. They struggle to date. They struggle to find anyone they kind of feel is good enough or suitable for them. But that group is born out of a frustration at the male red pillars saying women have it easy. This is all our struggles. There's sort of an equivalent women's group that's like, no, we have these terrible struggles too. Everything is terrible. And it's a lot smaller. It's still horrible and very sexist in both ways, but it's definitely less prevalent and sort of, I don't know, it's I don't want to say violent because that kind of ascribes to the whole collective something that I think is a bit over the top. But it's less combative, I will say, the sort of femcel side. It's more of a feels like more of a I'm very grumpy complain within the group, whereas the kind of incel red pill side of things is more well, some of it's more active. A lot of it is just it's over, I'm sad, but the majority of it is much more active and loud than I found any of the female kind of equivalents.
And so
Now I'm
are
saying
the
female.
no, it infects your brain. No. So are the femcells, do they like consider themselves like a part of the same movement? Would they have points of agreement with the incels and the red pillars, or are they like opposite ends? They don't like each other either.
Yeah, I mean, can we not just like throw a mixer for the incels and the
Yeah.
Right.
femcells and then make a little nudge, nudge, nudge?
That's
Right.
what
We
you
found the
that's what you would
solution.
think, and it's been kind of suggested and joked about a lot of the time, but the only instances I've seen of them sort of discussing each other is just totally like combative. Again, each group thinks the other one is completely wrong because
They're the
no, men
problem.
don't
They're the problem.
understand how hard it is for us, and they're like, no, women don't understand how hard it is for us, and they just won't. And each group, because a lot of it is ascribing, an actual rating to people's appearances, which we know is subjective, and it gets into a whole weird. It
Never
starts you off
doesn't
on the
lead to
wrong foot.
something weird. Whether
It
we're
always
talking
leads
about
to
like
something
the
weird and
inside of a
bad.
bathroom stall, or whether we're talking about like proto
Yeah.
Facebook, like whatever it is, if you are ranking people based on appearance, you're gonna get in trouble.
It goes bad. But a lot of that kind of primary ideology is around. It's called. Gosh, what's it called? And now, because you've mentioned Facebook, I want to say like Face Smash. It's it's your
Passer
match.
smash or like some of
Your
those kind of
looks
hot or
match.
not. Yeah.
It's your
Looks.
looks match. So basically, everybody has an appearance scale. So I don't know, you'd be like a
Quotient.
4, and if you're a 4, you should date the equivalent 4. And each group, the femcells and the incels, has a very skewed idea of what is a 10 versus a 1. So each group thinks that the other group isn't good enough for them, and vice versa.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very interesting. If you're ever feeling bad about yourself, some of the incel forums, the kind of people that they will call like a 3 are like some of the most gorgeous celebrities you've ever seen. It's really like a confidence booster.
Yeah, I mean,
Wow.
I honestly think that whole notion of somebody being out of your league is one of those ideas that we can just go ahead and put a red sticker on because it kind of belongs in this world. I know that that's
Mhm.
something that gets very much out into the wild as something that we kind of normalize as a concept. and it's so fundamentally flawed. And then even if you are holding it very loosely, it's very problematic.
Yeah, massively.
Yeah. So I know that a lot of these ideas are not exactly new, and Christian culture as well as red cell culture and a lot of these other things are kind of feeding off of each other. But how prevalent are some of these like specific ideas, that some of this incel language and framework in our everyday culture and life?
Well, it's difficult to say because it does draw from so many, different sources. A lot of the kind of biological determinism side I have seen and heard out in the real world to like a surprising degree. I've been I've been in the office with a male colleague who's said like it's surprising that there are women here who are editors because women aren't usually interested in technology, and like that's all these little pieces that kind of feed into this ideology. It is definitely one of those things, and I always like to flag this when we're talking about red pill and stuff because it is very performative, and
Mm-hmm.
it reads much scarier and darker and more sinister on the internet because it's very a lot of these forums are about, especially because a lot of them attract teenagers, a lot of it's about being edgier than the next person, the darker things you can say, the cooler you are on this forum. A lot of the incel forums specifically have a lot of gatekeeping, and if you're not to this certain level of sort of sexism, then you're not a real incel and things like that if you don't hold these certain outrageous views. So I think it is good to remember that most people aren't anywhere near that extreme in real life, which is a relief. But on the other hand, you do then have the occasions where it will pop up in the news that someone has been out somewhere with a weapon and done a lot of harm, and they have coincidentally been a member of all of these kind of red pill manosphere forums. And I think it's not wise to ignore that is a thing either.
Fair to say.
Yeah, even if it's not the opinion that everyone holds, if it is such a loud vocal minority that people who have, minor, lesser versions of that opinion are walking around hearing that and thinking that this is what most people think. This is generally everyone's opinion of how women are or how violent that my peers are. That's not something we want people thinking is normal. If we want to live in a society that is not incredibly violent and scary and dangerous. So, yeah, I agree with you. It is still a concern. Oof. Well, on that happy note, what do you say we take some calls?
Let's do it.
All
Yeah.
right. Well, first up, we have Daniel. Pronouns are he, him, and he almost fell into the manosphere. So let's hear from Daniel and see what his story is. Hey, Daniel, welcome to the show. How are you doing?
Hi, I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Excellent. Well, thanks for calling in. Tell us what's going on. It sounds like you've got a pretty interesting story. I want to hear it.
So it was interesting that you were talking just before, especially Emma, about the more moderate side of things, because I came very close to falling into the red pill and the manosphere sort of ideology without ever touching any of those forums in the first place. It was almost entirely through YouTube that I came really close to sort of falling down that rabbit hole of that ideology. It was when I was just leaving high school.
Sorry, go ahead.
So I was just leaving high school and just falling out of religion. My grandfather is an Anglican minister. My family raised us culturally Christian, but here in New Zealand, it's not really a big thing. So there wasn't much enforcement of that. And as I started looking into atheist YouTubers, I started watching as well people like Armored Skeptic or Sargon of Akkad, who at the time were also just starting to move into like anti-feminism, anti-SJW, and a lot more of that sort of manosphere-centric ideology. And there was a period of time where I ascribed to sort of that low-key ideology. I thought that the things that they were saying about women and women's issues being, especially with Ahmed Skeptic, he was saying they're not fake, but they're misinterpreted. And I was going like, oh yeah, that sounds reasonable.
That'd be really convenient for
Like,
everybody.
Yeah. Those women just
yeah.
don't understand what they think their problems are.
No, we don't say that there is no wage gap. We say it's a mistake in the data. And it sounded sane and reasonable to me at the time, but that's because I was a stupid teenager.
Well, and that's the danger of pseudoscience too, is if someone is able to frame their argument and dress it up with enough correct information and using enough of the sciencey sounding language and making it seem like we're reporting research results. This is real evidence. Never mind that the conclusions they're coming to based on that are not at all warranted by the evidence, or that it's completely out of context, or that they, completely ignored half of the data. But if it sounds reasonable enough, that's going to be good enough to fool a lot of people who aren't sitting there looking at a pile of data and ready to read through, 200 pages of evidence to figure out, whether this is correct. That's how pseudoscience gets into people's lives in a lot of ways. So especially if, like you said, you're a young teenager and, you don't know, you're not familiar with this kind of thing, I can absolutely see how that would be an easy trap to fall into. So how did you figure out that this was not the one true path?
Well, it was almost entirely by coincidence. I was very fortunate. At the time, I ended up joining my local university's gaming group, like Dungeons and Dragons, LARPing, that sort of thing. And it turns out that there's an almost 100% overlap between the Auckland LARPing community and the Auckland queer community. So
we see that around the world. That's a little universal.
Yeah.
Yeah. So suddenly I was actually being exposed to people with different perspectives to mine and different ways of thinking about these issues. Whereas before, the only exposure I had to the opposing viewpoints were these curated videos of, feminist SJW goes crazy, which didn't actually reflect the genuine seriousness or earnestness of people thinking about these issues or talking about these problems. So I could talk with people my own age who actually understood how I was feeling and what I was feeling, and could present a perspective that I'd just never seen before.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
So
if your worldview is being curated by an algorithm and you have sort of outsourced your own moral philosophy to a corporation, things can get really messy really quickly.
Yeah, and we've seen how, AI, tends to fall down a really dark path, when they make the AI bots to, go online and pretend to be people, they immediately absorb all of the toxicity and, become really problematic in their posts. And that's what we're exposing ourselves to. Yikes. But it sounds like you found the solution, which is go out in real life and talk to real people who are different from you and see what they actually think. That's awesome.
Yeah. The one thing I just wanted to say as well is my family raised me alongside my cousins who were Polynesian, so I had this image of myself as being very progressive and very straightforward on a lot of issues. And so at the time, that made it much easier for me to fall into the trap, because I was thinking, oh no, I'm a reasonable person, I'm not a racist, I'm not sexist, I've been raised in this more progressive family and culture, and I just didn't see what it was doing to me.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you actually ended up having a lot of insight in the end to be able to examine that and realize, let me hear some other perspectives. Maybe those are good ones too. So
yeah, I'm just glad that you're in community, because as Emma kind of alluded to earlier, that really does seem to be the antidote here. But I know that was also kind of a deficiency of community is kind of what causes the disease in the first place. So especially as we are coming out of, I don't know, figuring out this weird pandemic, that's really something I think for all of us joining collectively online across the world to be mindful about.
yeah. And get plugged into a community. there are people out there that want to hang out with you and talk to you, and they're not all going to tell you that it's because, the world is against you and everyone hates you and it's all over. Well, that's great, Daniel. Was there anything else you wanted to share about your experience?
No, that's it. Thank you very much for having me.
I
Awesome.
appreciate your
thank you for
insights.
calling.
Thanks for sharing
Yeah.
with us.
Have a good one.
All right. Well, we're going to jump back into the interview here in just a moment. But first, let's take a look at what's been going on around the rest of the ACA.
It doesn't have to go super fast. It doesn't have to go super slow. It can go whatever pace that you want it to be, because you don't have to care about another person in the room. It's one of the best parts about masturbation is nobody else is there.
Yeah.
I can do whatever I want.
I feel like I'm going to put this on and I want to learn about QAnon. And why do I have this? I don't know. But teach me.
John just put on a cloud nose inexplicably. I think that's a Q John is what I'm going to call that.
QAnon.
John.
You don't have freedom from religion. Well, that's right, I don't have freedom from religion. But I still have the right to tell you to f off if you're trying to impose it on me, and f off if you're trying to impose it on my children. I still have that right.
This water has magic powers now. Does that mean that this water has magic powers just because I said it? Or do we need some other way of verification?
Yeah, well, you need to be a reliable source.
I'm a super reliable source.
Is trustworthy.
I'm incredibly trustworthy.
The oceans and all of the rivers on Earth are supposed to turn into blood. Did we miss that?
It has happened. It is happening in China. It's happening in India.
The ocean is turning to blood in China and India? What are you talking about?
Well, Kara touched on this a little bit, and I think we've been kind of talking around it. But Emma, something I've heard you do over and over again on your channel is just highlight the way that like a little pinch of wisdom and good advice can get mixed in with the misogyny. What are some of your favorite, like, true but not really true talking points that come up when we talk about this?
Well, the again, originating back to kind of pickup artistry and dating advice, it's always kind of hinged on mixing a lot of basically common sense in with, ridiculous sort of theories and things. I mean, a lot of the best and most effective kind of teachings, I guess I want to say, will talk about things like work on yourself first and be comfortable with yourself, which is basically obvious, and it can be useful for people to hear. There's things that are like I've heard like weirdly specific things are usually my favorite. So one of my favorite ones from, I think the book is called How to Be an Alpha Male, and it was all in this big list of go to the gym, get a hobby, all of these kind of things. Was like, take your woman on holiday, because then not only will you broaden your horizons, but you'll broaden her horizons. And it's like, yeah, I guess that is basically obvious.
Not bad advice, I guess.
Yeah, there's always like that sprinkling of something that makes basic common sense, and it's sort of like half of those, especially in those kind of pickup books, it's just about sort of self-confidence. It's the kind of thing you would find in a like The Secret or something like that, just sort of general life affirming books about personal confidence, which can be really useful. But unfortunately in the alpha male red pill sphere, it is just all deeply intertwined and mixed with misogyny. So it takes a lot of work to kind of unwrap that and pull out okay, well, yes, do focus on yourself, but don't focus on yourself because women aren't interesting. It's that kind of thing.
Or because it'll emphasize your testosterone levels, or
yeah, exactly. You have to kind of pull those parts out.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like there's so many little ideas like that. I mean, I didn't mean to just pull up the testosterone one, but Yes, it is true that if you have not been exercising or eating well, that by getting your body back in line, that you are going to have more balanced hormone levels. And in a lot of men, that may mean increases in testosterone. That's not the same thing as, but it may also lead to increases in libido, in confidence, in like decreased anxiety, and a lot of these things. So exercising is good advice. Exercising because it'll make you a manly man alpha male is ridiculous.
Yeah, I was looking at some soy conspiracy things, you know,
Oh,
the whole
yes.
soy milk. Soy milk is making men effeminate. That's
Turning
why
all the
men aren't
frogs
men
gay.
anymore. It's turning all the frogs gay and it's turning the men into women. And it was sort of all this advice was phrased around, and there was sort of sexism dripped in, but it was phrased around this weird pseudoscience. And it was one kind of like Kara was talking about earlier, where once you actually read the sources, if you actually look at them, all of the sources they use kind of debunk their own points if you actually read them properly. But the end sort of result advice that this particular guy came to, I can't remember his name, some dude in his car talking about soy, I can't remember. But it was basically like, cut out junk food and processed food and eat healthier stuff, get more protein. And it was like, well, of course that's going to help people. That's genuinely good advice, and you will feel better if you stop eating all the things he said to stop eating, like crisps and cookies and stuff like that. It's like, well, yeah, of course. The risk you run there, because we can sort of leave it alone and say it's basically good advice. The risk you run is then people having success with that, but then therefore attributing that to the conspiracy and thinking it's about, say, in that case, soy, rather than about just eating healthier.
And
There's the
become like
same
an
thing with kind of
acolyte and a
gatekeepers.
model for that kind of thinking.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. I gave up soy and now look how healthy I am. It's because I, also quit eating
Exactly.
junk food and started exercising, but it must have been the soy. Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Well, and can we also just talk for a minute about this concept of the alpha male and how that also is pulled straight from the pages of pseudoscience? Like, what do people mean by this term alpha male? And then I really want us to pick that apart, rip it apart like a pack of wolves, if you will.
Yeah, so you're clearly as aware as I am that alpha male was sort of this misunderstanding that came out of this. I've talked about him so many times, I've forgotten the gentleman's name now. But it was basically
David Mack,
it was
I think.
I can't remember.
He's done some work on it after the fact with like zoo animals, but it's like that there was a book in the 40s that all this got based on.
Yeah, David Meck in 1970 is what a very
Thank you.
quick Google is showing me, if that checks out with y'all.
Yes,
that sounds
yeah.
right.
And like you
I
said,
think the general it was he was looking at wolves in captivity rather than in the wild was sort of the main. But yeah, the term is misappropriated from wolves having an alpha male in the pack, which it turns out is not true. But even so, people aren't wolves, so it wouldn't really have mattered.
Science checks out. Yeah.
Yeah, turns out not the same. Well, and what I love about it too is that when you look at wolves in the wild, there's a male and a female that tend to be in charge of the pack, and they're monogamous for life. So, and it's the rest of the pack is their pups. So yes, they're in charge of them, but also how this translates into pickup culture and you're gonna get all these dates if you become an alpha male is a mystery to me, because that's not even what the wolves do. This is so incorrectly
It's so funny
based
to
on.
me. I feel like you could just sort of pick whatever species because there's some species where the female is more aggressive. There's some species, where they, change their sex to procreate. And I'm like, I think that if I was going to make up some sort of faux pill theology of my own, I would start with the I think it's anglerfish, who the
hugely
male
sexually dimorphic.
Yeah, the really small males attached to the really big females, and kind of eventually all that's left is this sort of pair of fish testicles. I think that's where mine would start.
See, it's science. Men
It's
are
science.
just this parasite on society. Really, all they're good for is testicles.
Can you imagine if we were subscribing to, the praying mantis view of dating? A third of the time you just literally bite someone's head off. I mean, it's natural. It makes it okay.
Yeah, I mean, I get it on the one hand. I feel like we're almost going back and forth between like pitting the incels and the femcells together and laughing at the ridiculousness of the alpha male theory. And yet I know how easy it is to get sucked into so many of these things. I mean, we heard it from our last caller. And I guess I'm curious, when you are learning anything about dating online or just trying to learn how to be a happier, healthier person, of course we want to apply those like normal critical thinking and skepticism skills. But Emma, do you have any advice for how to like be aware of this kind of manosphere thinking in particular? What some of those red flags are?
Well, it's like anything that veers towards the really conspiratorial or almost cult-esque, there tends to be like a secret language. If you look at something and half the words you don't understand because you don't recognize, that's a pretty big red. You shouldn't have to learn a secret code to understand basic life advice. So that's kind of a main thing, I would say. The other thing, and this I kind of apply, this may be overly skeptical, but this is something I apply in life sort of generally, is work out if they're trying to sell you something. Because if, again, where this all originates with pickup artistry, it's about selling a course, it's about selling a book, and then they've got 5 more books, and if it was successful the first time, you wouldn't need to buy the next book.
Sure.
And suddenly it's, whether it's on YouTube and, it's, I don't know, sponsorships, or, I mean, there's perfectly reasonable books out there, but generally, if it's like, the only way to be like me and be manly and cool and get a wife is to send me $29.99, that's like a major red
This
flag.
one quick secret that I will tell you over the course of 10 hours.
Yeah, if it's so simple and will change your life, but also so complex that you can't learn it anywhere else, it's not real. It's impossible.
And it's like probably pseudoscience again. If you're having to pay this guy, 6 easy installments of $19.99, I bet that's not peer-reviewed scientific research. I'm just throwing that out there, publish
say.
that someplace
Yeah.
legitimate and make it available if that's real information. But, of course, it's not.
Mhm.
So, yeah, absolutely.
We've kind of highlighted some of the like specific language and jargon, and I think that's an important red flag. I'm gonna really stick to that idea of like objective beauty and like this is what makes somebody attractive, and people being in or out of each other's leagues. I think that's an important one to highlight. But even if we are far away from like traditional manosphere spaces, we're just having a conversation in the park with a friend. What are like some of the thinking patterns or some of the beliefs that we want to be, I don't know, maybe skeptical about or kind of wary and pushing back on?
There's so much that is just, like you say, kind of just deeply ingrained, sort of socially and culturally, whether it's things like, when you look at media and how normal a relationship between, say, an older man and a younger woman is, and how abnormal a relationship between an older woman and a younger man is, or, even stuff like we see fewer queer relationships and things like that. And then you tend to, there's kind of almost a comedy film trope that I always love, which is the like goofy, average looking dude and the supermodel woman.
Doofy dad and hot wife. Yeah.
And hot wife. Yeah, exactly. There's a lot of kind of tropes like that. And we do also I think it's natural for a lot of us to kind of put ourselves down and assume that we are all sort of, that there is some kind of scale and we're all low down on it I mean, if that was true, then the scale would be smaller, you know. But yeah, I think some of that is just and human self-deprecation to just think that, and it's so common as well when you get into relationships, you sort of start to see a pattern of always thinking that the other person is kind of like too good for you, but that's like love is two people thinking they're too good for each other. And yeah, it's difficult. There's a lot of you will see the same kind of examples of when it comes to, you know, what about ex not traditionally attractive male with super hot girlfriend, and the kind of red pill manosphere will find a lot of ways to excuse things like that, and it tends to be money or fame or whatever. But there's always real life average person examples of, you know, it's not tens dating tens, or, you know, like women on whatever side always go for the 10 men, or whatever it's supposed to be. You can, as soon as you start spending time in real life and looking at real couples, you can see that just isn't reality. So it's hard because you don't want to say like, well, look over there, there's an ugly dude and a hot woman, because that's not what we should behave like. But there is a way to have that conversation with your friends and sort of point out that real life doesn't really ascribe to those, you know, those kind of made up values.
We're not using matching algorithms. We're having conversations.
Yeah. It's because you don't meet people via, well, maybe you do on dating apps, but most of the time you don't meet people via an algorithm. People just connect.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And yeah, and you make such a good point too, that, you know, these are things that are, you know, sort of like based on, I guess, sort of the qualia of experiences, and the things that you like about someone may have nothing to do with, you know, whatever, you know, if their weight or their height or the shape of their face conforms to certain standards. But it's so easy to fall into this trap of, oh well, we've quantified it, so now it's science. It's pseudoscience again, when we're, you know, randomly assigning numbers to things that are not quantitative in nature. Like, this is, and when I say in nature, I don't mean like out in the world. I mean, they are not inherently quantitative things that you can just give. Oh well, that person is a 7.2. Based on what? What are you talking about? It's absurd.
Yeah.
I mean,
And
anything that implies that attractiveness, or really any aspect of our humanity, can be quantified and then particularly ranked. That's where you're getting into trouble, because there's nothing universal about our humanity or what we choose to value in our humanity. I mean,
well,
I
that's it.
even like,
And
yeah, go ahead.
well, it's just that also we all have, you know, within certain cultures specifically, but we're all exposed to the same beauty standards as well. So maybe 9 out of 10 women in this study think that Brad Pitt is number 10 on the attractiveness scale, but that's because we've seen Brad Pitt in so many movies and we've been told so many times that that is what is attractive. And that changes. I mean, you see this discussion a lot in like fine art, because the ideal you know, model of what a beautiful woman is, say, is clearly demonstrated to change over time, and that's the same across the board.
Yeah, it's going to vary across time, across different places, you know, like you said, different things that you're exposed to growing up and in the popular culture. I mean, these are not things that you can objectively rank. I'm sorry, you just can't do it. If you think you can, you're not out talking to real people and having real meaningful interactions, in my opinion. So, okay, switching gears a little bit, but you mentioned this earlier, and I know I've heard you do a really good job of explaining this on your own channel, Emma, but the word female, what is going on with that, and why is it problematic in these circles?
Yeah. So this is an interesting thing, and I tend to get this kind of reactionary sort of opinion from people that think that I have a problem with just the term female in general. I think there are times when it can be appropriate, and if you say it occasionally, I don't think that's a problem. The problem is that typically within this kind of manosphere, women tend to be described as either females, most commonly, or girls. And girls is its own problematic thing because typically, this is another huge problem with these kind of forums and ideologies, is that they tend to rank attractiveness of women as a lot higher the younger they are, to the point of quite dangerous thinking again. Conversely, female it tends to be used in more of a kind of an objectifying sort of way. And you can tell when it's being used that way because people will say men and females. They won't say males and females, they'll say men and females or men and girls. And that's how you know that it would be like saying women and boys. It sounds weird. It sounds wrong because they're not equivalent words. And it's about it tends to then be in context of talking about women as things that operate like a computer program that operates under a set of rules that you can learn.
The female
and
algorithm can be hacked.
The female algorithm can then be hacked. Exactly. And that's when its usage is kind of problematic.
It's again trying to add that layer of science, which is actually pseudoscience, by using this term that sounds like I've picked up a biological term that I'm using here. Therefore, I must be speaking about something factual. Not to mention too that it sounds like, what you're describing too is kind of an attempt to reduce women to their reproductive biology, almost in a sense. We're taking away the cultural and the social elements of what we mean when we talk about gender, when we use words like men or women, and instead we're going to only give women the quote unquote biological term so that we can it seems like almost trying to take away their humanity a little bit. Is that maybe taking it too
I mean,
far?
I'll be honest, when I hear the phrase men and female, it doesn't sound great to me, but it doesn't ring an alarm or feel, I guess, awkward in the same way as women and boys, just because of the way that we've been socialized, how we have like normalized a lot of that language. Hearing that explained to me, like, kind of set off a light bulb.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the fact that that isn't alarming, I think, says a lot about, like you said, how normal this kind of thinking has become for us. Even those of us who were not in this, manosphere or way of thinking, we have encountered this way of thinking and we've absorbed it to some extent, to the point that that didn't sound as abnormal as the opposite. Yeah, it's a really good point. So, are there other terms like that that you can think of, Emma, that are kind of just as soon as you hear it, oh, this is probably a red pill situation we're dealing with?
Ooh, it's hard because it's so kind of vast, but anything that is like it really is, you could do a whole. Actually, I think on one of the Reddit forums about incels there was a whole glossary that somebody made because it's that in-depth sort of language. But as soon as you hear one of the most popular ones and sort of common ones is adding the word maxing onto the end of something, and that is to improve something to the best of your ability. So if you looks max, you're making your appearance as good as possible. If you gym max, you're going to the gym as much as possible. So if you hear anything described as something maxing, that's red pill language.
Good to know.
Well, I want to give Kara a chance to get us back to the phones, and I have to admit this question might be for an audience of one, but I'm okay with that. Let me ask you, if you imagine yourself as like a 20-something-year-old man feeling light years behind your friends when it comes to dating, and your therapist tries to talk to you about some of that problematic language and some of that problematic thinking, what do you need to hear in order to become like more aware of that misogyny and that toxicity?
It's such a difficult, because it's one of those things. It's a bit like deconverting. It has to start with you.
Sure.
and,
Yeah.
and it's so hard to start unpacking that. I do think that because so much of it really revolves around kind of loneliness and feeling sort of lost and isolated and left behind, I think that just hearing and knowing that it's normal for some people not to have dated a bunch of people. Some people have never dated by the time they're in their 30s, and that doesn't mean that it's over. There are plenty of people who can give you good advice and hear you out and understand how you're feeling, that it's okay to be upset about it, but it's not abnormal in any way. Because I think, and again, I think this is kind of a bit of a media problem, is that romance and dating and relationships are, especially when you're in high school or whatever, is so kind of popularized in media that it can feel like you should be there, and you're missing out, you're doing something horribly wrong. And I
If you
think
didn't have prom night sex, you are some sort of
exactly.
total loser.
Well, I mean, again, a lot of these kind of forums, like a lot of the discussions are based around, if you haven't done it by 18, if you haven't done this by 12, if you haven't done this by 14, if you haven't done this by 18, then it's over. And that's just not true. And understanding that there's always time, like look up stories of couples meeting in nursing homes. Like there's always time, and just knowing that just by not having experience, you haven't done something wrong. And just one thing you learn like too late, one thing you learn after having been in like a relationship or two, is that just being honest is like this miracle cure that can really make everything better. And that saying, I'm sorry, I don't really have much experience dating, is, the right amount of communication, just anything like that, most of the time will be met and received positively, because you're just being honest. You don't have to perform as, what a woman expects a man to be at 26 or whatever you are. There's hope for you just being yourself and being honest. I think that's important groundwork to me.
That's good advice. Be yourself and be honest. I like that a lot.
No, for sure. And I've pointed this out on the show a bunch of times, so I'll try to move quickly. But I feel like, especially when I am working with young men who came out of the church and are in this sort of like feeling like they're late in life daters, and I put really heavy air quotes on that for the podcast audience, that there is this like real push and urge to just get the second date, to like win somebody over, to impress somebody. And we forget that if we are like getting that second date by being somebody totally other than ourselves, we might be able to fake it into like date 4 or 5. But this opportunity that we could have had to like filter out somebody that is not interested in the real us, and that we probably wouldn't be interested in ourselves if we were more focused on the conversation and more focused on the relationship than on trying to like win the game, we could have avoided all of that.
Yeah, agree. Well, what do y'all say we take another call?
Please do.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, we have next up Neo Shark. I love the name. Pronouns are he, him, and he's got a question for us about BDSM. So let's hear it. Neo Shark, welcome. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for
So
calling.
I went to a munch last night and I came across something that, like, I've been fairly active in the BDSM and kink community for about a decade now. And this is the first time that I've ever come across this kind of thing. So I had a lovely conversation with someone at the munch. We talked about a whole slew of things. I finally got to talk to something about like atheism and skeptical thinking. So that was fun. But then they, like, I forget how we got into the topic, but they explained that apparently that I won't say where it is, but in this certain kink community, there is apparently this unspoken rule that tops are not allowed to ask bottoms for play, and this has literally been the first time that I've ever heard this, and it was genuinely upsetting because after hearing this, looking back in hindsight at some of my interactions, because I recently branched out into this new community, and some of the interactions that I had with some people just struck me as very strange. Like I messaged someone, because like what I like pickup play, and what are the ways I like making friends is kind of like with pickup play. I like meeting new people, talking about their kinks, and like doing some like light pickup play stuff. Nothing super intense, just casual stuff, really fun. And it's kind of been my modus operandi. And so one of the things I do is I just like check out munches and events local by, see people that I might be interested in playing with, and like send them messages like, hey, I'm branching out to this new area, looking for new play partners. Are you interested? And because I ostensibly present as white, cis, hetero male, for most of my adult life and young adult life, my experience on the internet is that I'm just ignored for the most part. Like, and so, and like, if I don't initiate anything, then nothing happens. And so to come to this new location and to find out that basically I'm not allowed to initiate anything was, I mean, like, what upset me was that it wasn't clearly expressed. If it was like at a dungeon with the set of rules, I could understand that. But this is apparently...
That's what I was going to ask. Yeah, I'm sorry to jump in, but I just really wanted to clarify that point. We're not talking about like a play party or a dungeon situation where there has been a problem and so there's like a codified rule. You're just saying that it seems to be the culture here for, you know, it's not even a rule. It's just happens to be the habit that tops aren't really allowed to ask bottoms. Okay.
It's expected. And if you violate this expectation, you were essentially ostracized. Now, like I said, I just found this out yesterday, and some of my other interactions kind of lead me to believe that this isn't prevalent within the entire community here. It's just like probably a subset. And it was extremely upsetting because like I had interactions with people and I thought things were going well. Like I had like a little mix up with someone and they just promptly blocked me. And I was like, whatever, this is not the first time. I just moved on with my life. I happened to meet them at a munch later on. I just explained like, hey, I don't have a problem with you blocking me. Whatever reason is fine, legitimate. I don't care. I just like don't want this to become awkward later on when you find like if we hit it off and you find out later, oh, this is that person that I blocked. And then like I thought everything was fine. Like it was a little awkward, but everything was fine. And they even sent me a message like, hey, what are you doing here? Like, why did you come here? And I sent like a nice long several paragraph response because like I'm fairly certain I'm slightly autistic or on the spectrum, I should say. And so I sent like a nice long reply, explained kind of like highlights and everything, and then nothing. And then I saw them a few more times at the munch, and I kind of got this vibe that things were kind of awkward with us. And like ever since then, I just stopped interacting with them, and they just promptly ignored me. And so that's one of the instances that kind of like struck me as strange. And there was another conversation I had with like a group of people who like we were talking about things, and I talked like, sometimes like if I'm at a munch and I'm really hitting it off with someone, I'll be, and like afterwards I'll be like, hey, if you want to do something kinky after this, like I'd be up for it, but like no pressure, nothing, like no expectations. If you don't want to, you're not comfortable. I know we just like met, like no problem. And like two of the people that I was having, it was like a group, two of the people that I was having conversations with were legitimately upset to like, even at the time before I knew this, they were upset to a surprising degree that I recognized at that time. And it just struck me as odd. And like one of the people, kind of the similar situation as the previous one, like I thought we had hit it off and had a conversation. Nope, blocked next time I checked. And so that's kind of why I put some kind of like justification into like what the story I heard.
You didn't just
like,
dismiss that. Yeah. I mean, I think you're right to be a little skeptical. Anytime we're talking about unwritten rules, we need to really be mindful that we not take them too seriously. And, you know, you're being skeptical and looking at how you as an individual have had these sort of anecdotal experiences. So, you know, there's some real like logical and statistical fallacies to be mindful of. So I'm glad that you are being like willing to challenge some of those things. But it is true that we live in
it took a little bit of calming down for me to like the rational
I
part
hear
to
that.
kick in.
Yeah, and that's fair. But I mean, I'm not trying to justify or defend, but particularly when we're talking about something that is so like vaguely enforced and people might not even know that they're thinking in that pattern, it's worth remembering that we live in a bottom-heavy world and that abusers, when they exist in the kink community, are overrepresented as representing themselves as dominants. So there is, I guess, a rationale here, but that doesn't mean that there's like room for active discrimination. No, I'm sorry. Let you clarify.
No, like I understand where you're coming from, and actually, like the person like at the bunch, like I have a partner there too, and so like afterwards we went back to their place and had a conversation, and they actually said something that like just struck me like getting knocked in the back of the head by a 2x4. They said like sometimes from like, again, I present as very stereotypical cis straight male, and so from the other end, if the other person is having a conversation with someone and then suddenly at the end they're like, hey, you want to do kinky stuff or have sex, it might cause them to question my intentions. And so that kind of like put things into a different perspective. So I could see where this kind of rule originated from. Like if that, like it wasn't ever, that was one of the most upsetting things about like finding this out, is that it was unwritten. No one bothered to clearly express this. And what was the other point I had? Like no one took the time to explain like, hey, that's not really, because like I'm very clear, like I'm fairly new to this area, like and no one bothered to take the time to be like, hey, like that's not kind of the thing here. So, like some people take offense to that.
Yeah, I mean,
like
let's just acknowledge that it's a bad rule, right? Like I can kind of justify the rationale for it to a certain extent, but anytime we are limiting our communication and like swallowing our words when talking about our sexuality and seeking out sexual partners, we're hamstringing ourselves. We don't want to be handcuffed by not being allowed to talk about certain things. I get the notion of not wanting to like pester or nag somebody into having sex with you. So, there's a reason for it. And I think it is just important to remember that these communities are formed as a way of keeping people safe from some very real dangers. And a filter that catches every problem is also going to accidentally catch some dolphins, or however you want to stretch that metaphor. So I guess all I can really say is I'm glad that you have gotten your feet wet in this community and gotten some sense of what maybe the lay of the land and what the local cultural flavor might be. When it comes to culture, we can't even really say good or bad. I call it a bad rule because as a therapist, I just think it's going to cause a lot of problems. But you're here.
I agree.
Yeah, it doesn't apply to everybody. Like it's not a rule. It's a cultural moray, if we will, and it's one that is just begging to be maybe not actively or aggressively violated, but at least like conscientiously pushed back against.
Yeah, I had to think about it, and like originally I was gonna be like all fire and brimstone gung ho because I was gonna like write a post on FetLife, but like I've since calmed down. I'm gonna take a more nuanced approach because like I sat down and I analyzed it and I realized like the rule is kind of toxic. Well, the toxic in the sense that how it is enacted, because it is a rule that is not clearly communicated, which is literally setting people up to fail. Because new people come in and there's this rule that you're supposed to follow, but you don't know the rule because no one tells you. It's like inviting someone to play
inherently
a game,
discriminatory.
and one of the and one of the rules that determines whether or not you can win isn't even told to you. And then again, there's the whole it discriminates against tops.
Yeah, and that's interesting. You've come back a few times to that. I didn't even know about the rule. How are they having a rule without even telling people that it's there? Did anybody follow up with you and say what is the expectation? Like it sounds like you got the message that okay, tops are not supposed to be asking bottoms to play, but did they say what is being expected? Was there any kind of clear communication about what those expectations are when this did eventually come up? Or is it still unclear?
So when I was talking to the person who like kind of like revealed the whole thing and kind of like put my past experience into perspective, they said what tops are expected to do is kind of just like talk to people and kind of in a sense like put out their wares and be like, hey, this is what I can do, and then that's it, and then just sit and wait, I guess. But again, this was told to me by a person who like this was the first time I was interacting with. It was just a conversation, and I wasn't interested in playing with them, and it's just kind of that.
Yeah. Sounds like good advice to listen to, not necessarily good advice to obey. Is that a fair way of framing it, y'all think?
Yeah, it is starting to sound to me too like maybe it's someone's reporting their idea of what someone else feels comfortable with, and we're kind of playing telephone at this point.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Like I said, there's like 3 major dungeons in this area. One that I've been to fairly regularly because they have a lot of free nights, and I'm kind of in a financially strained situation right now. And like I've had pretty good experiences there. I mean, heck, I told you like I went to a munch and met my current partner. So like I have had some success. I have made some connections. So how prevalent this rule is, I don't know. I have no understanding. But like I said, with some of my experiences, it kind of lines up. So there is some people who seem to follow this kind of rule.
Yeah, well, I'm glad that you are starting to get settled in, that you've got your eyes open. I'm sorry that you've been through this, but I guess I would just encourage you to softly bear this quote unquote rule in mind without actually feeling obligated to it. Gently sort of pushing back against that while doing what you can to just be yourself. And I do appreciate you kind of raising the question for us.
Yeah, I'm interested in hearing like other people's perspective, but like, so the thing that there was 2 things that kind of like upset me. It was there was this rule that I was expected to follow that no one communicated, but it's also the fact that there was this kind of like toxic culture within a community. I've been active in the community for 10 years. Like I started my kind of like journey in Texas, moved to Wisconsin. I've been active in Madison, Milwaukee, and now this new place that I don't feel comfortable talking about really. And throughout my entire almost 10 years, this is the first time I've ever experienced anything remotely like this. And it just like I said, struck me like a 2x4 to the back of the head. I was like, what is this? Because one of the things that I really like about the kink community is that we put so much emphasis on like clear communication and very like detailed negotiations. Like the clear negotiation is one of the ways that we defend ourselves against the bad actors within the kink community. Because like one of the things they like to do, like one of the things the bad actors, one of the things the predators in the kink community like to do, one of the things is they will deliberately leave out like sexual contact within the negotiation. And then during the scene, they will go for it and then use the fact that it wasn't negotiated as kind of like a get out of jail card.
Yeah. No, clear communication is crucial. So yeah, that's why I would definitely encourage you to not take this too much to heart. It very much sounds like Kara said is rather anecdotal evidence. I'm sure that somebody somewhere has felt that way, and I'm sure a lot of people act that way, but people get bad dating advice in every community. And so I'm glad that you're kind of like working through some of this.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks for bringing that up too. I mean, it's a good question. And yeah, glad we got to talk about it. And I agree completely with Christy. Just, keep communicating with people, take it with a grain of salt and go from there. But
Mhm.
thanks for the call. I'm going to go ahead and let you go so we can move on. We're getting close to the end of the show, but I appreciate you calling in and feel free to check back in and let us know how it's going later. All right, take care.
All right. Well, Emma, before we wrap up tonight, I don't know if this is an entirely fair question to challenge you with, but I really would appreciate your insight on how we as a society can try to find some sort of middle path between like supporting men who are struggling with this type of loneliness and these like very challenging expectations, and then also calling out like the possessive and entitled thinking that tends to get grouped into all of this. What can we as a culture be doing better?
Yeah, and I mean it's such a tricky line to try and understand. And like most like everything in, just social life at the moment, it feels like everything has to be very divisive, that you have to stand on one side or another. And I think that kind of thinking is part of the problem. I do think that I mean, there's a lot of kind of historical stuff that is interesting, kind of that moves alongside, this kind of red pill, or even outside of the red pill, just kind of men and young men feeling left behind. Things like it's hard for us to analyze. I mean, it's hard to analyze happiness in general, but it's hard for us to analyze, especially how men are feeling, because historically men underreport their feelings compared to other people, and so and we build up a culture of, how socially acceptable it is for men to express their feelings, and that's changing, and that's definitely something that the more you can encourage your friends and your siblings and whoever to express their feelings openly, the better this will be. Outside of that, it's very tricky, because you have to, especially I would say it's most important to call out when it is in what's the word I'm looking for, in some almost like some sort of hierarchical system. If it's something that, if you experience this kind of red pill misogyny in the office, or you hear it in parliament or something like that, it's very important to then tackle that, because that's a trickle down effect, right?
Sure.
That's how it infects the the lower ranks, so to speak. But and it's really hard not to do, because some of the content can be horrible, and a lot of the time you just want to be completely furious. But by trying to remember that, yes, a lot of the behavior is performative, a lot of people are just young and sad and lonely, and just trying to make a space for people to be sad and to be able to express themselves, I think can help. It's so tricky, and I've talked to a lot of people who just say, I just don't have anyone I can talk to in my life nearby. And there's a lot of kind of things. There's forums and places. I think there's a lot of resources you can use and you should use that are not specific to an ideology, if you see what I mean. Like, if you use a generic kind of venting, chatting thing, like you're on Discord or you're on something like Seven Cups, I think that is better than going to Forum for Men Who Are Sad
Sure.
.incel.co, where everyone is just reinforcing their own sadness. If you go to somewhere broader where you're open to talk about your feelings, you're more likely to get different perspectives, if that kind of makes sense.
Again, just that surrounding yourself with a diversity of people,
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, this is maybe not 1,000% universally true, but if you are spending a huge amount of your time only around your same gender, or even your same race, let alone your same ideology, you're getting yourself in trouble.
You're in an echo chamber, and you're not going to learn something new if you don't expose yourself to something new.
So ultimately, where do you recommend people go for healing?
Well, I mean, it is tricky, and it's not. There's no. I can't recommend friends.com where you magically make the perfect friend group. Unfortunately, I wish I had that power. But just try open it, because a lot of people are so afraid to open up, and you can later discover that actually it was safe to do that all along. It's safe to open up to a friend. Just try trusting a little bit of your feelings in the people around you. And then of course, I'm always on freaking Twitch and Discord and whatever. There are so many online spaces, places for you specifically to vent. There's places for you to meet other people who are interested in Dungeons and Dragons we talked about earlier. Like there's a lot of communities that can just boost you up by making you feel just valued and like a friend. And then something that I know is a bit more problematic depending on where you live, especially if you're in the US with the complicated as heck medical system. But professional help is always great because it is completely impartial and you don't have to worry about somebody in your life knowing you and judging you. But I know that that's not easy for everyone to access.
Fair to say.
Yeah.
Well, and how about some other resources that are easier for people to access? Can you think of any books, podcasts, YouTubers, anything like that that people might find useful?
I mean, if you want to kind of learn more about that sort of red pill side of things, and I think because, and it's interesting that the skeptic community kind of came up earlier. I was talking to Aaron Ra a while ago about how that went off, and a portion of that drifted off into sort of anti-feminist stuff, and what a shame that is.
Yeah.
But a lot of the people who get into the kind of red pill ideology do so because they have a sort of skeptical mindset and they're interested in kind of debunking things. And I think that debunking the red pill is a really interesting way to kind of get out of that mindset. So there's a book called Men Who Hate Women by Laura Bates that is really, really good and interesting. It's like 13 hours on an audiobook. There's a podcast just called Incel. It's by Crawl Space. I can't remember who. It's an investigative journalist. I can't remember specifically who it is. But that is a very interesting and kind of slightly more humanizing take because she talks to people who identify as incel and learns from them, and you get to see that sort of humanizing side alongside the kind of the hatred and the backlash that she personally experiences. And then honestly, if you whack debunking the red pill into YouTube, you'll get a lot of really interesting resources. You have to be a little bit careful because it's so complicated. There is also some people who debunk the red pill are debunking the red pill to promote the black pill, which is actually just a more extreme version of the conspiracy.
Right, sure, yeah.
So be a little bit careful with your searches, but yeah, there's so much interesting stuff online. Kind of you can find from like a factual skeptic perspective if that kind of appeals to you, because I think it does a lot of people.
Well, and you're online too. Where can people find out more about your work?
You can find me on just at Emma Thorne on YouTube. I'm at Emma Thorne Videos, I think. Oh, there you go. Yeah, handles are a thing now, and Emma Thorne was taken, so that's sad. And I am Emma the Goblin on Twitter for as long as that lasts. I know, how can somebody do that to me? Yeah, but I have some videos on the kind of incel stuff and femcel stuff and sort of red pill alpha male. I've been criticized for both being too hardcore of a feminist and too apologetic to men. So somewhere in there means maybe there's balance that you might find interesting.
You're doing everything wrong according to everyone. You must be making some pretty interesting points. So I'm a subscriber. I'm excited to see what you come out with next. So I'm definitely looking forward to it. I recommend, can recommend.
Thank you.
10/10. Well, thank you so much for joining us this evening, Emma. This has been fantastic. And I want
it's
to
been
take
wonderful.
Yeah, I hope we get to see you again. And let me remind everyone about what else is going on with the ACA. Don't forget to check us out on our website at atheist-community.org. And you can always email the show to at sex@atheist-community.org. Or you can email the ACA directly at tv@atheist-community.org. And in addition to all that, we are back in the studio live once a month. Again, we're doing that now. And you can come join us there on November 17th. And indeed, the 18th and 20th as well. But Secular Sexuality will be live on the 17th in the studio with Christy and JP Cardenas talking about fat liberation. So doors open at 6, show starts at 7. Don't miss that one. Additionally, Truth Wanted is going to be there with Dan and Jamie. Talk Heathen is going to have Forrest and Dan, and The Atheist Experience will have Forrest and Christy. So come on down to the studio for any or all of those and come see everybody. We will be there. And also, don't forget, if you want to check out the podcast version of the shows, you can find us at tiny.cc/AEN podcasts. And that's your one-stop shop where you can get the audio version of all of the ACA shows, not just this one. But of course, we highly recommend this one. And you can also follow our fan group. It's the Facebook Secular Sexuality fan group. Sorry. There it is, tiny.cc/FBSSG. And don't forget tiny.cc/ACD Discord for the larger Discord server where you can meet with lots of other cool people. We talked about the importance of community and finding other people to talk to. Discord is a great place for that. So come check us out. And finally, not finally, I have two more things. Almost finally. Don't forget to check out the super cool merch that changes all the time on tiny.cc/merchaca. And you can see if you're watching the video version, you can see our latest shirt has dropped. So don't forget to check that out and get you some of that swag if you would like to. And now, finally, the most important part, the crew cam, the people who make this all possible. Thank you to all of the team.
Hey, thank you so much. All right. Well, Emma, before we leave tonight, are there any kind of final thoughts or just last impressions that you want to leave with the audience?
Just don't be afraid to be sad. It's okay to be sad. It doesn't mean it's all over. It's okay.
Damn. Yep. That is great advice. All right. Well, with that, I guess I will encourage everybody listening, whether you are a male or a woman or an alpha anglerfish, go give yourself a big ol' orgasm. Or better yet, give somebody else one.
Watch Talk Heathen live Sundays at 1 p.m. Central. Visit tiny.cc/YTTH and call into the show at 512-991-9242 or connect to the show online at tiny.cc/callth.